Hello Internet, I'm Ryan Howitzer and you're on the line of fire. As promised, today we'll be looking at X-Men. Created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby in 1963, the X-Men are a group of young mutants under the leadership of Professor Charles Xavier, who fight for equality between mutants and humans. The X-Men's roster is ever-changing and expanding, but among the more famous members of the X-Men are Storm, Cyclops, Jean Grey, Rogue, and, of course, Wolverine. The X-Men battle all kinds of villains, both human and mutant. Their most persistent adversary, until recently, however, but let's ignore the insanity that is modern X-Men continuity, is Magneto and his Brotherhood of Mutants. While the X-Men fight for equality, the Brotherhood seeks to rule over humanity. Making things even more complicated is the fact that Magneto and Professor Xavier are old friends. Let's look at the actual production history behind the movie. X-Men is directed by Bryan Singer and written by Solid Snake. No, I'm not even kidding. David Hayter, the voice of Solid Snake, wrote the screenplay. Anyway, the movie was released in 2000, just 2 years after Marvel found success with Blade on the big screen. Marvel had a lot riding on X-Men, including the Spider-Man film franchise. Alright, now enough backstory. Let's get to the movie itself. After a cool opening monologue over Black by Professor X, and some cool opening credits, we open in Poland in 1944. Okay, Bryan Singer, at this point you won't be making Valkyrie for another 8 years. What on earth are you doing opening this movie in Poland? Oh, I see. Yeah, I'll shut up now. This is a young Magneto. Much like in the comics, his hatred for humanity goes all the way back to his time spent in Auschwitz. The scene is basically his origin story. We go from there to Mississippi in the not-too-distant future. There's no point in me making the MST3K joke. You've already made it in your head. Here we see Rogue, played by Anna Paquin, telling her boyfriend about her plan to travel to Canada. The two kiss, which causes Rogue's powers to activate. This doesn't work out so well for the guy. And you thought your first kiss was awkward. Rogue's parents call for an ambulance, and we go to Washington where Jean Grey, played by Famke Janssen, explains what we just saw to a Senate hearing. She's interrupted by Senator Kelly, longtime douchebag and the leading proponent of the Mutant Registration Act. He gives his "mutants are dangerous" speech, and we get our first look at Sir Patrick Stewart as Charles Xavier. From what I've read, Sir Pat was one of the first people cast in this movie, and if it's not blindingly obvious to you that he is the perfect Professor Xavier, then you need a high five. In the face. Xavier sees a man put on a fedora and leave the hearing. We then find out that this man is Magneto, played by Sir Ian McKellen. Xavier and Magneto have a conversation that firmly establishes their stances without beating you over the head with it. I mean, just listen to this dialogue.
Don't give up on the merit.
What would you have me do, Charles? I've heard these arguments before.
It was a long time ago. Mankind has evolved since then.
Yes, into us.
We cut to Rogue, who's run away to Canada. Wait, from Mississippi to Canada? How long did that take her? Anyway, she goes into a bar where she sees Wolverine. If you don't know who plays Wolverine, you have brain damage. For the first time. He's cage fighting. I love what the ring announcer tells his opponent.
Whatever you do, don't hit him in the balls.
You said anything goes.
Anything goes, but he'll take it personal.
Wolverine makes short work of him, and later he and Rogue are sitting at the bar watching the Exposition News Network.
Leaders of over 200 nations will discuss issues ranging from the world's economic climate and weapons treaties to the mutant phenomenon.
The guy from the cage fight does one of the stupidest things you could ever do in the Marvel Universe. Well, besides commit a crime in New York City. And we see Wolverine's claws come out for the first time. 14 years after the fact, I'm still impressed by the CGI in this movie. Sure, there are certain things that look dated. I mean, we'll talk about the Statue of Liberty when we get there. But for the most part, everything looks awesome. It's a shame that same standard of quality didn't go into the other X-Men movies. Wolverine leaves after making everybody wish they'd worn their brown pants today, but he later finds that Rogue has stowed away in his trailer. He begins to drive off without her, but has a change of heart and lets her ride with him. They have a scene where they banter back and forth with each other, and give little snippets of their backstories. In the comics, Wolverine has kind of a mentor-big brother relationship with Jubilee. Now, even though Jubilee does have a brief cameo in this movie, that role is filled by Rogue. She's basically Wolverine's unofficial sidekick. Rogue makes a crack about Wolverine needing a seatbelt, and the gods of irony strike in the form of a falling tree that throws Wolverine from the car. He gets up and we get a good look at his healing factor. He goes to help Rogue, but he smells something. Sabretooth then attacks him. As many of you may know, Wolverine and Sabretooth have a history in the comics. That history is not covered in this movie. It's covered in a much worse movie. While the two fight, Wolverine's trailer catches fire. However, Cyclops, played by James Marsden, and Storm, played by Halle Berry, show up to save the day. We then cut to Ray Park cosplaying as an Oompa Loompa. I'm kidding, of course. He's playing Toad, the most annoying and stupid member of the Brotherhood. He taunts Sabretooth about failing, and then Sabretooth goes to report to Magneto. Meanwhile, Wolverine wakes up in the sub-basement of the X-Mansion and nearly kills Jean Grey. You could play a drinking game with this movie. Every time someone passes out or wakes up after passing out, take a shot. He then hears a voice, which he follows all the way to Professor X's physics class. Xavier tells him where he is and that he was attacked by the Brotherhood. He also introduces the X-Men. Wolverine finds it all a bit silly.
This is the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
Xavier then tells Wolverine about the school and why it exists.
Cyclops, Storm, and Jean were some of my first students. I protected them, taught them to control their powers, and in time, teach others to do the same.
He also goes into how he first met Magneto. He then makes a deal with Wolverine that if he stays for 48 hours, Xavier will help him unlock his memories. We also see Rogue in class with Pyro and Bobby Drake, aka Iceman. They don't have much of a role here, but they'll become pretty important in later movies. We then cut to Senator Kelly being a smug jerk inside a helicopter piloted by Toad. Senator Kelly's aide turns out to be the mutant shapeshifter Mystique, played here by Rebecca Romaine. She knocks him out. If you're playing the drinking game, take a shot. Mystique takes Kelly to Magneto, who gives one of the best villain speeches of all time in this scene.
Are you a God-fearing man, Senator? That's such a strange phrase. I've always thought of God as a teacher, as a bringer of light, wisdom, and understanding. You see, I think what you really are afraid of is me.
After Kelly gives the cliched, "You won't get away with this," Magneto fires up a machine that turns Kelly into a mutant. Back with the X-Men, Jean shows Wolverine to his room, and the two flirt. Jean looks into Wolverine's mind and sees visions of Weapon X dancing in his head. They're interrupted by Cyclops. Yeah, there's a bit of a love triangle between Jean Grey, Cyclops, and Wolverine. It's in the comics too, but I think it gets a little too much focus in these movies. However, on the plus side, it does give us some great banter between Cyclops and Wolverine.
You gonna tell me to stay away from me, girl?
Well, if I had to do that, she wouldn't be my girl.
That night, Wolverine has nightmares about his Weapon X days. Rogue goes over to him and gets stabbed once he wakes up. Wolverine calls for help, but Rogue touches him and uses his healing factor to save herself. Wolverine passes out and Rogue runs away. Take a shot! Wolverine wakes up later, take a shot, and Xavier explains Rogue's powers to him. Meanwhile, Senator Kelly uses his rather disgusting newfound mutant power to escape from jail. Magneto taunts him about being a mutant now and lets him go. Kelly washes up on a beach and we get our Stan Lee cameo. He's the hot dog man. Kelly grabs some clothes and watches the Exposition News Network. We cut to Bobby and Rogue talking at the mansion. Bobby is a jerk to Rogue and convinces her to leave. As it turns out, though, Bobby is really Mystique in disguise. Once Wolverine finds out that Rogue ran away, he demands to know where she went. Xavier then takes him to Cerebro, a machine that Xavier uses to find mutants. He uses it to find Rogue. Wolverine asks Jean if she's ever used it, and she explains that it would be very dangerous. Oh, you already know it's a plot point. You don't need me to tell you that. In a really cool sequence, we see Xavier find Rogue at the train station. He tells Wolverine to stay behind, but Wolverine steals Cyclops' motorcycle and goes after her anyway. Storm and Cyclops, of course, go too. With all that going on, Mystique impersonates Xavier, sneaks into Cerebro, and puts in some sort of mental poison stuff.
Look out, Professor X! She spiked Cerebro with Rogaine!
At the train station, Wolverine finds Rogue and convinces her to come back. Meanwhile, Cyclops does nothing, and Storm gets attacked by Sabretooth. Toad knocks Cyclops' visor off, which causes him to lose control of his optic blasts. On the train, Magneto shows up and tosses Wolverine around like a rag doll. He then reveals that he was after Rogue the whole time, and he knocks her out.
Take another shot.
While the Brotherhood tries to make their exit, the police show up. Magneto throws cars around and turns all their guns back on them, while uttering one of the best lines in the movie.
You Homo sapiens and your guns.
Suddenly, Toad and Sabretooth turn on him. Charles Xavier has taken over their minds. Magneto and Xavier have a standoff that ends with Magneto sparing all the police officers in exchange for a safe getaway. Back at the mansion, Wolverine is understandably pissed off. He storms off and is about to leave when suddenly Senator Kelly arrives looking for Jean Grey. Xavier assures Kelly that he's among friends and examines his mind. He enters Kelly's memory of being zapped by the mutant machine and finds out Magneto's plan for the summit at Ellis Island. The X-Men then determine that he needs Rogue to copy his powers and use the machine because it nearly killed him the first time. Meanwhile, Storm is with Kelly, who has a change of heart right before turning into a blobfish and then dying. Xavier enters Cerebro once again to find Rogue. However, he falls victim to Mystique's trap. No, not Rogaine. My bald is beautiful.
Professor X is now in a coma. So I guess it's business as usual for the X-Men. Oh, and take another shot.
Jean examines Cerebro and finds the trap. She removes it and then attempts to find Rogue herself. Cyclops sees her and tries to stop her, but he's too late. Jean emerges from Cerebro overwhelmed, but she was successful in finding Rogue, who was with the Brotherhood on Liberty Island. We see the Brotherhood infiltrate the island, and Magneto gives his villain speech to Rogue. Meanwhile, at the mansion, the X-Men prepare for battle. Wolverine even gets a suit of his own, and he has a few choice words to say about it.
You actually go outside in these things?
What would you prefer? Yellow spandex?
Good one, Cyclops. But in all seriousness, I do really want to see a version of Wolverine's classic costume on screen at some point. Come on, Fox, make it happen. It doesn't look that bad.
The X-Men land the jet and enter the statue. Wolverine sets off the metal detector and gives us the obligatory middle finger claw joke. Wolverine then smells something and gets in a good zinger on Cyclops. Wolverine is then attacked by himself. Toad attacks the rest of the X-Men and is somehow winning until Storm has the good sense to shoot him with lightning. And then she delivers a lame one-liner.
Do you know what happens to a toad when it's struck by lightning? The same thing that happens to everything else.
Wolverine and Mystique continue to fight, and Mystique runs away. She later tries to convince Wolverine that she's Storm, and he promptly stabs her. Wolverine rejoins the group, which leads to my favorite Wolverine-Cyclops exchange in the whole movie.
Hey, it's me.
Prove it.
You're a dick.
Okay.
They make their way into the statue itself, and Magneto traps them there. He taunts and monologues like a good villain should, and then leaves them.
Because that worked out so well for so many other villains.
Wolverine escapes by stabbing himself through the chest, and the fight we've all been waiting for goes down. While all that's going on, Magneto transfers his power to Rogue and fires up the machine, which is hidden inside Lady Liberty's torch. Awesome! Wolverine gets Cyclops' visor back, and Cyclops blasts Sabretooth out of the X-Men movies forever.
Okay, he comes back in X-Men Origins Wolverine, but can you blame me for trying to forget about that movie? Even Fox wants to forget about that movie.
Wolverine wants Cyclops to blast the machine, but Cyclops points out that he might hit Rogue. Wolverine then decides to stop the machine himself, so Storm and Jean combine their powers and launch Wolverine up to the torch. Magneto gets his second wind and tries to stop Wolverine, but his attempt is thwarted by an optic blast from Cyclops. Wolverine stops the machine, but it's drained Rogue, leaving her with a white streak in her hair. Classic.
If anybody out there even thinks about making a Frozen joke, I will find you. Rogue had the white blaze first.
Rogue once again touches Wolverine and begins draining his power. This time she drains so much that his wounds begin to come back and once again he passes out. You know what to do here. The police enter the statue and Mystique disguises herself as an injured security guard to escape. Back at the mansion, Xavier wakes up from his coma.
Take 2 shots. One for Xavier and one for Wolverine here in a minute. Spoilers.
After Jean explains what happened to the professor, she goes to check Wolverine. His wounds are healed and he wakes up. Yay! Now we get a sequel! Xavier shows Wolverine that he found the old Weapon X facility at Alkali Lake. He tells Wolverine that he might find answers there. Wolverine says goodbye to Rogue and tells her that he's going to come back. He leaves her with his dog tags. The last scene of the movie is Magneto in a prison made entirely of plastic, playing chess with Xavier. The two end the movie in much the same way that they open the movie, with their friendly but firm dialogue towards each other.
The war is still coming, Charles, and I intend to fight it. By any means necessary. And I will always be there. Old friend.
I give this movie a 9 out of 10. To me, it still holds up and it's definitely worth watching. My next video will be a Hypertime video about Green Arrow Escape from Supermax. But next time, Tim Burton's Batman will be in the line of fire. Thanks for watching. Hi, Kathy. I told you I'd mention you on the show.